evening, America. I'm Veronica Corningstone.
And I'm Rhonda Burgundy. First thing on the agenda, we have Veronica with the weather. Veronica?
Thank you, Rhonda. As you can tell, it is a tad windy and nippy out here, so get your eggnog and blankets and curl up for that Christmas weather. The path of immigration is well traveled. The first federal restriction on immigration was the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act that banned Chinese laborers from coming to America. Other than that, restrictions were left up to the states. When Ellis Island opened in 1892, it was the gateway for more than 12 million immigrants. Getting to the United States was relatively easy. Until 1918, a new person only needed to be coming to the United States if they had someone identify them. No passports were needed. In 1920, Congress made quotas for Northern Europeans and Mexicans because they were wanted for cheap labor. The issue of immigration gained traction through the changing views of society. With World War II and the Cold War, the American society began to develop tolerance and unity. The Refugee Act of 1918 established an immigration procedure and financial aid plan for refugees. In the early 20th century, after discrimination and immigration restriction, Ellis Island immigrants were gradually accepted into the mainstream. Since the 2015 terrorist attacks in Paris, the American policymakers have concerns about Syrian refugees entering the United States. And this year, the refugee admission and assimilation process details the way refugees enter. The Obama administration announced that 10 million refugees from Syria would enter in 2016. Back to you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Veronica. Next up, we have a special guest, Chimamanda Adichie, a Nigerian woman who experienced immigration firsthand. Chimamanda?
Thank you, Rhonda. I grew up in a middle-class family who was very fortunate. My family had a houseboy named Fide. Fide's family was very poor. I was always told how poor and horrible the boy's life was. We gave him clothing and food. I always pitied the boy. I went to visit Fide one day, and his mother showed me a beautiful basket that Fide had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. When I began college in the United States, my roommate was very surprised that I could speak fluent English, even though English was my native language. My roommate was also taken aback on the fact that I had liked the same type of music and didn't listen to tribal music. My roommate had one story and one picture of who I would be because of what she was taught. None of her perception and expectations of me were true. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes is that not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story.
Thank you for sharing your story, Chimamanda. It was very inspiring.
Thank you for having me.
Now we are on to Rhonda with sports. Recently, at a Minnesota Vikings game, a man named Deepinder Mayel was harassed about being a refugee. Deepinder was in fact born in New York and currently lives in Minnesota. He is an attorney and the director of the Refugee and Immigrant Program at the Advocates Human Rights. The hateful man wrongly accused Deepinder because of the single story he had been taught. The hateful man did not get kicked out or punished for his behavior. Deepinder said this about the situation. In that moment, I was terrified, but what scared me the most was the silence surrounding me. As I looked around, I didn't know who I was and who was an ally or who was an enemy. Back to you, Veronica.
Thank you, Rhonda. That is a terrible shame. It is situations like this that we should think about. I'm here with Danielle Bastel. She reviewed the Ellis Island Nation Immigration Policy and American Identity in the 20th Century by Robert L. Fledgler, published by the Kentucky Historical Society, and she's here to tell us about what she found.
Thank you, Veronica. Robert Flegler makes important observations about the evolution of American immigration laws and the changing ways Americans viewed immigrants and their children in the early 20th century. I think that the most significant observation that Flegler made was how World War II and the Cold War accelerated the tolerance and unity of all racial, ethnic, and religious groups. It prompted Americans to support the idea of democracy. Flegler labeled this ethnic contributism. He said it emerged mid-century and emphasized that the U.S. was enhanced by the ideas and skills brought by Eastern and Southern European immigrants, and it expanded the definition of American identity to include generation of former undesirables.
Thank you for that insight, Danielle. Information and education are so easy to obtain that it would be relatively easy for newspaper articles to post unbiased, accurate facts rather than opinions, and learn each other's backgrounds and understanding people as who they are, not for what they are supposed to be. These solutions would ensure that Americans have the correct idea of what is going on around them.
The refugee and immigration crisis is a large issue. It mainly stems from the unwillingness of Americans to inform themselves on the topic. The perspective of only a single story is detrimental to understanding others. However, if we change the single story through education, we can change how people perceive the world. If newspapers also wrote unbiased, accurate news, Americans may have a better understanding of the events going on around them. The issue of refugees and immigration would still be present, but at least Americans will be better educated.
That concludes our newscast for today. I am Veronica Corningstone.
And I'm Rhonda Burgundy. Don't just have a great night, have an American night.